Great to be here. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Annie, as always. It's good to be here again. It's nice when they invite you back. That means you must have done something right. So, but you know, I'm lucky to follow Sam Ruda, and I want to echo the things that he said. You know, a big organization like the Port Authority can always be criticized. It's easy, but to do that, and particularly in their case because they're non-political and they really can't fight back. So it's, but the scale of the accomplishments, the things that they do on a regular basis with their heads down is pretty astonishing. I mean, raising the Bayonne Bridge, deepening the channels, you know, while doing also a new Goethals Bridge right next to the Howland Hook Marine Terminal, all at the same time. That's a lot of infrastructure. So what I wanted to talk about is kind of how all of these trends affect New York City. And I should also say welcome to New York City, since I'm the guy from the city government, and we're thrilled to have you here. A little bit of a challenge because today is also Port Industry Day, so our friends in New Jersey are partying it up, but it's lovely to be here in this beautiful room, and convenient for me because I live across the park. So, I'm going to talk about New York's economy, and I really want to emphasize that kind of New York really gets it in that shipping, supply chain, logistics, transportation, distribution, all these things are important and vital to the city's economy. And the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where I lead the Ports and Transportation Group, was founded in 1991, but it has sort of inherited the mantle of the old Department of Ports and Terminals, which you can still see our logo up all over the city, the old agency, which actually dates back to Boss Tweed's time. So probably folks in this room back then were thinking about the future of maritime in the 19th century. So in our role, we get to oversee the city's seaports, a lot of the big distribution facilities, and the big one, of course, is the Hunts Point markets, which is, you know, the produce, the fish, and the meat, and, you know, one of the largest food distribution centers in the world. So, you know, what I think we increasingly are seeing is the connections between sort of the maritime side and the rail side to the vitality of those kinds of distribution facilities, which are crucial to the city's economy. I mean, we only have a 4-day supply of food in the city, so if supply chains are disrupted, as we're seeing, let's say, in Puerto Rico, you know, this is a city of 8 million people is really, you know, at risk. So a lot of what we're doing is informed by those issues as well. So we, of course, are working closely with the Port Authority. We also are working on freight planning with New York City's Department of Transportation, which is focused a large part on what we call the last mile. That's sort of the vital link between the terminal and the retail center, which we're all familiar with. And you all know that nobody in New York City, and probably nobody in any city, likes trucks. They always think it's, you know, if we could just do without those trucks, you know, life would be grand. But of course, we know there is not one truck in New York City that wants to be here, but they have to be here. So our relationship with DOT is really to see how we can make the transfer between the intermodal connection and the last mile as low impact as possible and as socially responsible as possible. We also work, of course, overseeing all of us as the New York Metropolitan Transportation Coordinating Council, which is oversees all the federal money that comes into New York, which is important. So here's Freight NYC, and this is a shot of our favorite railroad that runs through Brooklyn, the New York and Atlantic, which is in and of itself a great success story. When I started at EDC in 1997, in the 20th century, Long Island Railroad commuter trains were, well, the commuter service was actually overseeing the freight. It was a public freight line, and it was not doing very well. And in 1997, Long Island Island Railroad decided we're going to get out of this business and see if some private guy can take this over and do better. Well, the volume of freight on Long Island now is about 30,000 carloads a year. That's up from about around 10,000 in 1997. So you can sort of see, that's another theme, I think, in my discussion. But let's go back to the big story. So our region does about as much trade as the country of Australia. You've all heard of Australia. It's a big country, a lot of landmass. Well, we do about the same in terms of value, about $1.5 trillion of gross municipal product takes place in the New York region. And I think this astonished us. I think that the size of it. And the fact that, New York City's regional ports, still, the West Coast has really dominated, but we are really a very close number 2 with that $349 billion of trade just in the port alone. So it's, so we're a big market. It's important. And I think for a generation now, I think the city of New York really decided, we kind of turned our back on the industry in many ways and thought that it was taking place somewhere else. But as I said before, for various factors, we know it is crucial. It's really a big job generator because, it's an invisible part of the economy, but, you just have to cross over the 59th Street Bridge and you'll start to see in Maspeth, Queens, the place where the subway doesn't go, there's a lot of freight being moved. If you go up to the Bronx, to Hunts Point, there is a tremendous amount of freight being moved. And you see, the level of jobs, that's nothing to sneeze at. And that includes the wholesale trades too, but they're all part of the same supply chain and they're all important. And for us too, because this is directly connected to the city's jobs plan, New York City Works, the fact that the salaries are very good and the upward mobility within supply chain is very good. And that's why we're partnering with a number of area high schools to get kids more aware that this is a good career choice. And sadly, a lot of our labor, particularly heavy machinery work that takes place at the shipyards, which are kind of the garages of the maritime industry out in Staten Island and in Brooklyn, they have to import labor because nobody knows how to weld, nobody knows carpentry the way they, they do, the way they teach it down south or overseas. So this is something we want to address, that sort of skills gap in the industry, get more people in. So here's our challenge. We have 400 million tons of stuff coming into the city every year, and that's equates to a lot of trucks. And essentially those trucks cross over the George Washington Bridge, the majority, one crossing into an archipelago of 8 million people, and then another 5 million out on Long Island that have no other way to get freight except through this corridor, and so increasingly over the Verrazano Bridge as well. But we are very much a truck in, truck out city, and that imbalance has been something that we have been concerned about, and being right under the nose of one of the largest ports in North America, we're trying to figure out ways to connect better to it. And I should also add that we're not talking as much about air cargo, but that plays into this as well. JFK is still a dominant gateway, but it's been losing market share. So. But we really feel this is an inflection point in the supply chain world. A lot of exciting things happening. I mean, it almost goes unnoticed. Hey, the Panama Canal was just expanded and we take it for granted, something that was such an icon of American ingenuity. Well, it just got bigger. That's pretty amazing. For these big ships that now, I really enjoyed what Sam was saying, because 10 years ago, or actually 20 years ago, when we were looking at the volume of cargo coming into New York Harbor, we really nailed it. We said about 6 million 20-foot equivalent units of volume, but we said that the majority of them would be carried on ships maxing out at about 8,000 TEUs. So we got the number right, but we got fewer ships, and obviously, it's almost a little bit like World War I, sort of the guns of August. Once you mobilize to do something, it's really hard to turn it off. So, this sort of the the competition among the lines to get bigger and bigger, is certainly being felt here. So we have to take advantage of it, And, the other thing, that many of you are aware of is what China is doing, the One Belt, One Road initiative. And that, we had folks in from Transport for London, and we were talking to them about the freight trains directly to China. And they had big smiles on their faces because they feel, yeah, it's meaningful to them because it's, for the first time, they feel connected to the Asian manufacturing centers directly by rail. And it's something that, we're jealous of because it comes within 4 miles of the city center. A lot of ports are also developing inland facilities on less expensive land, and that's the Front Royale situation in Virginia, and something that we are thinking about in New York as well. It's still a fact if you go down to national trends that double-stack trains cannot come into New York City except to Staten Island. So the main consumption zone where the people live, our bridge clearances are too high. We have third rail encumbrances, so we don't benefit from double stack. It all has to come through New Jersey railheads if it's a container. We are looking at interesting innovations, though, on the container side, and that picture of the intermodal freight, that 53-foot truck is on a zero-emission prototype that was built by Texas A&M University for carrying freight across between Mexico and the United States, down in between Laredo and Mexico. And an interesting idea, that you could do something that's environmentally sensitive and move, in more or less an automated fashion. And another advantage there is that everything can clear customs and then move in that corridor. So we've got some old corridors in New York that we try to keep under wraps. Otherwise, the transit people will want them. But that's something we're looking at. We're also looking at shifting markets, and the railroads in the United States are really feeling the pinch on the coal industry. So we're hoping that urban markets like New York become more interesting to them. At the same time, automated truck platforms, Tesla just moved into Red Hook, which is extraordinary. They took over the old Golden Marine diesel engine repair shop, and now they're selling the most advanced car in the world, and trucks are certainly part of the equation. So, but we have not stood still on the local side. We have seen the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which is one of the city's owned facility, be reactivated. And what did it do? Its first shipment was pieces of the New York Wheel, which is our wheel like the London Eye. And it was a breakbulk move, but it shows that having ports within the city that are helping the city's economy, the new economy, are vital. We also have changed our format of our solid waste management program, where all of the garbage leaving New York City will be leaving either by marine, and that's a picture of the Howland Hook Terminal handling marine containers that come out of Queens, so getting trucks off the road and using the waterways again. And as Sam alluded to, the Matrix facility on Staten Island was a big deal. It happened just a few months ago with an Amazon's announcement. I was told 10 years ago by some of our friends at the Department of City Planning that we'll never see large format distribution centers in New York City because we'll just never meet the North Jersey price point. And it's like, okay, well, we just did, so that must mean something is up. And the question is, it makes sense that it would happen in Staten Island because Staten Island in many ways is like New Jersey, for those of the New Yorkers in the room. But it also means that freight wants to move east, and so we have to accommodate that desire, and it's in our interest to accommodate it. And then, of course, Hunts Point, we've been negotiating for a long time. The buildings at Hunts Point go back to the early 70s, and they badly need to be upgraded. So, and it's really key. We did a study that showed that about 90 million tons of food move into the city every year. 90 million tons is very heavy, and it's something that, of course, is vital to the city's future. So, And this is the trend. Right now, freight, as Sam was saying, it's largely along I-95, North Jersey, sort of down to exit 8, as I say, but it's also in the Lehigh Valley out around Allentown. And what we see is if we leave things to their own devices, you just push those supply chains further out. Norfolk Southern's main intermodal hub is out in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, so they've got to truck everything over Route 80 to get into the city. And these are concerning, and we certainly felt after Hurricane Sandy how vulnerable our supply lines are, and if they move further out, what does that mean for costs? What does that mean for reliability of the entire system? So what's next is we're taking on a new study. It's called Freight NYC. It's embodied in the city's jobs program, but it also looks at, what is, not necessarily what's happening today, but projecting out what can happen in 20 years if these trends continue. Larger ships, one of the, I guess, the paradoxes about the large ships is the terminals are scrambling to figure out how to handle the gate moves with so many containers arriving in one slot off of a large container ship, and they've struggled with that. And one of the things that they're looking at is segregating some of that eastbound cargo and putting it onto barges and having it travel east into places like New York City, Long Island, or New England. So that kind of idea. It's the whole purpose of containerization is increased efficiency. So if we don't have increased efficiency, what's the point? So we want to pick up on that theme. We also want to be more environmentally conscious, and it's certainly, it's not lost on us that the farther in a container travels to its final resting place by water or by rail, the better it is just on its face, because it's much more efficient on those modes than it is by the last mile diesel truck. So we want to look at how we can promote those modes coming in, but then how can we improve the trucks that are serving the last mile within the city? And so here's just an illustration. This is sort of our wild fantasies here of, a network of intra and interregional barges, something we are working on with the Port Authority, but also working on with other states and other ports. And for the first time, I'd say private actors like the tugboat companies, the tug and barge outfits, and the shippers who are interested in getting into this market in a more reliable way. So even though it may be slower to move this way, if you build it like as a never-ending chain, as we see, with slower sailing on ocean-going vessels, you can still achieve the same results as long as it's predictable. One of the things our shippers tell us in New York is, I just don't know when my box is going to show up, and it drives me nuts. And this kind of system, as we found with the ferry system, that's also been revived, that you can schedule these things and make them more reliable, even if they're slower, and for certain commodities it just makes more sense. So that's illustrates our looking at a barge system. But then there's also urban distribution centers as well. We have gateways and hubs, and as I say, Hunts Point at the top is certainly the big kahuna. But we're also looking at what can we do at JFK, which has a lot of land and might have the makings of an inland port of the future. And then the question is, how do you serve it? Because if any of you flew in for this conference and you took the Van Wyck Expressway, that's not the great solution, to end all. So, but what can we do in certain corridors, like, to create managed use lanes on highways so that commercial traffic have, periods of the day when it's just commercial traffic on those roadways, and stitching it all together with other places like in Maspeth, where we see the Wheel Spur Yard, which is a great success story of rail freight, of direct interconnectivity between rail shippers and the railroads, where you're taking goods right off of a rail car and adding value. In this case, we have if you go to a Greek diner in Astoria, chances are the edible oil that fried up your French fries came from the Wheel Spur Yard. but you didn't know it. And then another thing we're looking at, as I said before, with our partners at DOT is how do we create sort of a truck of tomorrow? You know, we have the taxi of tomorrow, but a truck that really can penetrate through the city and efficiently do offloading and create, and also go on places that no truck can go, like the parkways of New York City. So probably we're talking about things that you're already seeing with FedEx and UPS, but more efficient trucks on more efficient platforms that are allowed to go into more areas because they operate like automobiles. So this is it. I'm wrapping. I'm in my last minute, I promise, Annie. I'm finishing here. So what we're looking at is a world of tomorrow that's more sustainable. We reduce air emissions wherever we can. It's safer because you're putting freight in dedicated corridors away from general transportation. More equitable because we're really connecting people to jobs in these industries. Efficient because freight now has its sort of free zones where it can operate. More resilient. We have more gateways into the city going in and out, and more connected. We're more connected to the other ports on the Atlantic coast, the other railheads in New Jersey. And that's our story, and I'm happy to take questions, but thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about freight in New York City. Thank you.